the recording now. And you'll notice that there's a chat box function. You can pull up that chat box. You're welcome to type questions as we go through. Normally when we're in faculty meetings or other large meetings, I have somebody monitoring that chat for me. Let's see, Ms. Hinger, I see that you're with us. Would you mind helping me monitor the chat box and bringing my attention to things that I might miss? Oh, nope, you're driving, so you can't do that. Never mind.
And she's muted.
All right, Ms. Lang, thank you for monitoring the chat for me. And so if you have questions that you'd like to put into the chat box for me to answer as we go through things, please feel free to do that. Before we get started though, I really do, just because this community has really supported my family this summer, I wanted to just start by saying, I really do appreciate the way that the Athens community and specifically the Clarke Middle community has supported my family through our fire this summer. And it really gives me a lot of motivation to come back to school and try to make this year meaningful in whatever way that we can, given the situation that we're under, because I do feel like this community has really rallied around me and my family. So I'll just start by saying I appreciate that. And then there are two things that I just want to acknowledge as we start this conversation. The first is that we're in a global health crisis, a national pandemic, a state of emergency in terms of public health. And so there's no decision right now that's going to make everybody happy. There is nothing that we can decide to do as a school or as a district that's going to make every single person happy and give you back what we've lost right now in terms of the way that your children are educated. Our hope as a school, and I believe as a district too, is that we are making decisions that will meet the basic needs of our students, that will provide an adequate education while we all figure out what the next step is in the pandemic. We're solving problems as we find them, we're using new data as it comes out, and we're trying to make the very best decisions that we can. I'll say that one of the things that I have communicated to my faculty as we've come back over the last 2 weeks is that in addition to trying to make sure that we're meeting the basic needs of all of our students, that we're also gonna, in our decision making, prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable in our community. And when I talk about the most vulnerable, I'm talking about both medically and academically. And so a lot of our decision making processes, we think about what the vast majority of our students need, but then we also try to take a step back and think about the outliers, the students who have very specific needs, and whether the plan that we're coming up with is going to meet those needs as well. The second thing that I want to acknowledge is that you're going to have questions this morning that I'm not going to have answers to. And honestly, at this point, I sort of feel like that's a good thing. Because in the spring, we were thrust into virtual learning. We had about 36 hours that we had to process the situation and then turn around with a delivery system for instruction. And I'm proud of the work that my faculty did, but we really did. We did it quickly. We did it based on what we could think of at the time, and we didn't necessarily do it in a thoughtful way. And so we've got the gift of 6 weeks to prepare. I feel like we've used the 2 weeks that we've had so far wisely, and we've got a good plan for the 4 weeks that we have left. And that time is going to allow us to be thoughtful and intentional about the online instruction that we roll out. And so to sort of give you an idea before we open up for questions of what that preparation has looked like, I have taken the strategy of having 3 sort of separate layers of preparation going on simultaneously. One is the preparation of our teachers, and we started by really just revisiting what good instruction looks like, what it means to have really good, clear learning targets for students, as well as what are the primary characteristics of adolescent learners, so that we could start thinking then about how do we take those needs in a digital environment and meet those needs in different ways. The second layer has been with my admin team and my leadership team, and we're starting to try to develop the online structure that we're going to present to parents and families in a consistent way so that it's very clear what online instruction will look like come September 8th, so that all of the links for online classes are consistent, so that all of the websites with the information that you're going to need is consistent, so that the means of communication with families is consistent, just basically so that there's a clear structure that we're not building as we go through instructional weeks, but that has already been built on the first day of school. And then the third layer of our preparation has been data gathering. I'm going to drop a link in the chat box right now. So in my last parent letter last Sunday, there was a link to a readiness survey that was our first attempt to start getting some information about the resources and the status of all of our students at home so that we can do a better job of planning with those needs in mind. And so if you haven't had a chance to fill out that survey, please go through and click and answer questions. It is a little longer than you might think. The more that I thought about what information does a teacher need to know in order to adequately plan for this situation? It's really more than just, do you have internet or do you not have internet? Do you have computer or do you not have a computer? It really felt like there were more factors than that. And so the survey does take, 5 or 10 minutes to complete because we want to make sure we have comprehensive information about all of our families. Starting this next week, we're going to take that data gathering to a next step. We've got about 200 responses so far. I'm going to publish that survey in my parent letter again this week, and I hope to have 300 or 400 responses by the end of the weekend. And then starting next week, we're going to start calling one by one all of the families that we haven't heard from, so that we know what everybody's status is in terms of their ability to function in a digital learning environment. And then the fourth track, I know I said 3 tracks, the fourth track, and this is really just a small group of people in my building that are still working on it. So teachers who are in our chat this morning that may not have heard some of these things, I apologize. I've been trying to keep you all separate from this so you can focus on the task at hand. We are also in the background planning for the eventual face-to-face return of students. We think it's important to put a great deal of our teachers' effort into planning online instruction because that's the most immediate need, but we recognize that sooner or later we are going to come back face-to-face, and we have to have systems, processes, resources, and materials in place ready for that to happen whenever it does happen for middle school students. So I guess that sort of gives you an introduction to the way that we've approached our decision-making and our problem solving around the situation that we're in. And I guess at this point, I'll open it up to see if there are any questions that you'd like to ask about Clarke Middle's plan specifically. I'm more than happy to answer anything I can about our district's overarching plan as I understand it at this point. I will give the caveat that I was in an update meeting with our district leadership right before I came here. I had to leave it 30 minutes early. So there may be a couple of things that they're covering right now that I'm not going to have the answers to, but I'll include any update information in my parent letter this week. And I've got my assistant principal sitting in on the rest of that meeting for me. So you can either put your questions in the chat, or if you want to pull up the participant window, you can do that by clicking on the participant button down at the bottom of your screen. And there should be an option for you to put your hand up in the participant window if you'd like me to call on you to answer a question out loud. I'm going to start with the chat box though. Ms. Adams has asked, do we know roughly what the daily schedule might look like? Yes, I got my formal schedule approved yesterday. And this is where we start getting into some of the conversation about synchronous versus asynchronous learning. And I'll get to that in just a second, but our schedule does run 9 to 3:30. We're going to run a 5-block day. Where students have their 4 academic classes and 1 connections class each day. We have a consistent lunch from 11 to 12. That lunch time is consistent across the district for every single school. I was really impressed with that decision to ask schools to do that, because I think it acknowledges the fact that we have a lot of parents who have kids in multiple schools, and they may need to work together to feed themselves in the afternoon. And so our lunch will run 11 to 12, and then we'll finish up with academic classes at 3 o'clock, and then we've preserved some time so that we can continue to have advisement and social emotional learning time from 3 to 3:30 in the afternoon. As far as what those 5 blocks of the day look like, they are all 60-minute blocks. And they will be a blend of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. For those of you who may still be sort of new to online learning, synchronous instruction is like what we're doing right now. It's where we're all together live. I'm presenting material, I'm talking to you, we have a back and forth conversation. Asynchronous instruction is where I either provide media for you to consume, or I provide activities for you to do on your own time when you see fit, and then I give you feedback on that work as you do it. And so each of our 60-minute blocks is broken up so that students will have both a synchronous component where they can check in with a teacher, get a live lesson, and then we'll also have an asynchronous component where they will either work in small groups, do independent work, or consume media that's been prepared by the teacher ahead of time. What other questions do you have? Mr. Kilpatrick has asked about band and orchestra. Right now, we don't have a plan for instruments for band and orchestra because we were planning on, in face-to-face instruction, we were going to start the year doing music theory and music appreciation. That was based on conversations that I had with my school nurse and with the director of school nursing about whether it was safe for students to be blowing through instruments in reasonably close proximity to each other. And so at this point, we are going to continue with that as our mindset. I've tasked Mr. Rubenstein and our new orchestra director, Mr. Reevy, with thinking about what that might look like to start the year with an appreciation or a theory class as opposed to with live practice. Ms. Cornish has asked when we are going to know specific class schedules. I'm in the same way that we've done with pretty much every year, we're going to do that at the very last minute. We already have all of our roster scheduled. We're looking at making some shifts in our student information system due to the change in our schedule that I just talked about. We do have most of those things finalized, but there's a little bit of fluidity with enrollment right now. We've had some students and parents who have withdrawn as plans have changed, and then we've got students and parents re-enrolling as they feel like the Clarke County plan is more in line with what they want for their child. And so I hesitate to publish schedules until I'm absolutely certain they're not going to change, because I would hate for a child to think they're getting this teacher that they really, really want, and then at the last minute we have to change it because of enrollment changes. And so we'll likely share those schedules the week before school starts, so that week leading up to September the 8th.
Mr. Penley, Ms. Cornish also added about homeroom teachers, and I believe that that's the same answer that you just gave. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, homeroom teachers will be included in that schedule that we will provide. And then we are also working on a digital or a virtual orientation plan. We know that we have some students who are going to need to come and get materials, whether it's technology or basic school supplies. We are going to plan a drive-through pickup where we're preparing some we're calling them digital learner bags, some string bags with some of the different materials that students will need, hopefully together with one of their textbooks that's part of our new Carnegie Math resource that we're using at the middle school level this year. And so we're planning that, as well as some opportunities for students to meet their teachers virtually that week before school starts as well. I see Mr. Mojak has his hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask your question, Mr. Mojak? I'm sorry, Dr. Mojak?
Either works for me. Doctor, I think, is my dad. Mr. Penley, thanks for hosting this. It's great to see faces. Makes me happy. Just saw Mr. Farrow pop up. Woo! My question is about attendance. What is the new attendance policy? How will it be managed? Will there be assessments as part of the synchronous component, or will the assessments be saved for the asynchronous learning?
That's a good question. So our attendance policy is something that is part of that developing structure piece that I was talking about, and we haven't gotten to that point yet. I have some, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I'm not sure if a rigid attendance structure is necessarily in the best interest of all of our students, but I also don't want to present the idea that students don't need to log in for their classes. And I feel like that's sort of what students felt in the spring. And so we are still tinkering with what our attendance policy is going to be. We are going to take attendance for classes. I've already got my student support team working on attendance incentives for online learning. But at the same time, I do want to acknowledge that we know we are going to have some students and families in our school community where older siblings are required to take care of younger siblings while parents are at work, while maybe some of our older students who've applied for work permits over the summer are even trying to go to work during the day. And if we find that we do have a family who's in a situation where the synchronous component of our learning isn't working for them schedule-wise, that we'll make accommodations for it. As far as assessments, I believe most of our school-based assessments will likely be done asynchronously. Most of those assessments are things that we would ask students to do independently in a classroom with the teacher monitoring, and they are things that students can do at home as well. Is there potential that students might try to cheat just a little bit? Yeah, there's potential for that, but I trust that all of my teachers are really good at formative assessment, at assessing sort of at a daily level what their students can and can't do. And so if we have a student who struggled in their class conversations and then they get to a big test or another formal assessment and they seem to know everything all of a sudden, then we're probably going to investigate that a little bit. As far as our standardized assessments, and right now we are still waiting on the federal government to give the state of Georgia a waiver for standardized testing, as far as I know, we do have some standardized tests that we will administer at the school level. And at this point, I'm waiting on the training for those to determine whether we will try to do those synchronously or asynchronously. My thought would be those will have to be done synchronously, because I believe that the software we'll use to administer the standardized assessment requires them to be done within a particular window.
Mr. Penley, can I update you on some of these chats?
Yeah, I'm going to go back
Okay.
and I was going to start at Ms. Kerwin because I think that was the last chat
With
one.
connections? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And so Ms. Irwin has asked, will each student have just one connection as opposed to two? And we are still doing 2 connections classes per student. We talked with our connections team, and please give some kindness and some grace to our connections team. They've experienced a lot of change, and they teach courses that are sometimes even more challenging to teach in an online environment. But we're going to move them back to an AB schedule. So your child will still have 2 connections classes. They'll attend one of their connections classes on Mondays and Wednesdays. They'll attend the other connections class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There's also a question about connections and whether it's possible to change connections at this point. I need to talk to my my scheduling team about that. They were having conversation about whether that would be possible yesterday. At this point, I think they were leaning towards we would only be able to make connections choice changes in cases where there were mistakes or missing information or scheduling issues, that just broad base opening up 800 students to changing connections classes might be unmanageable at this point in terms of trying to make sure that students all have a place to go for their connections classes. Ms. Lewis has asked, are students being divided up differently than usual? How will they be grouped? We have stuck to our general scheduling guidelines as we prepare for virtual learning. So students are grouped based on, in some cases, the need for them to be in heterogeneous groups so that they can work across different levels. And then also for students who have special needs, we have included the accommodations that they're supposed to receive, both for special ed students, ESOL students, students served under Section 504, and students who are served either as being advanced students or gifted and talented students. And we've maintained those structures at this point. For online learning, I'll say, I think it's important for me to acknowledge out front that when it comes time to come back face-to-face, depending on what the model of face-to-face learning looks like, what our restrictions are for face-to-face learning, and how many students will be back in the building for face-to-face learning, we may have to go back and revisit some of that scheduling and whether we're able to provide the same spectrum of services that we are right now, or whether we might have to pare down some of those services in order to get students scheduled and socially distant. Ms. Grogan has asked, will advanced accelerated classes still be offered? Yes, we do still have an accelerated math track. They will have the same, they actually will have more contact hours under virtual learning than they would have under in-person learning. And so I'm confident in our ability to meet those students' needs. We will still have advanced classes as well. And again, I'm confident in my teachers' ability to differentiate their online instruction for those students. Ms. Cornish has asked about computers and whether students who are having trouble with computers will be able to have that addressed. And yes, Ms. Hinger is currently working on a plan. We are very fortunate that our media center is on the side of our building that is closest to our car rider loop, and it has its own private door to the outside. And so we are working on a drive-through technology support system. We're going to start by taking in technology from all of the parents who might be leaving Clarke County. We're also going to take in any broken devices over the next couple of weeks so that we can send them off to get fixed, and so that we can have a stash or a stock to replace computers with. And then the 2 weeks prior to September the 8th, the 2 weeks prior to the start of school, we'll be inviting parents and families to come in to trade out devices to make sure that they have all of the technology that they need in order to be successful. And then as we move into September 8th and online learning has started, then we will have an appointment system where if your child is having issues, if they get a new computer and a week later the P key is still not working, that there'll be a way for them to come in and either trade it out or have it fixed.
I think attached to that, there was a parent expectation too for the virtual learning.
And that's a really good question. So the question is, what's the best way for parents to support their children in this virtual learning setting? Do I have specific expectations for parents? No, I mean, so as far as expectations for parents, we recognize that parents are used to sending your kids to us and we do the educating. So we're trying to plan around the idea that it's our job, that what we prepare has to be accessible to your child with or without your help. I know that is that was the wrong word. I know that is a lofty goal, but I think that's how we have to plan. We can't plan around the idea that students are going to have somebody sitting next to them for 8 hours a day to help them with their learning. As far as what you can do, I would say the very first thing that you should do is make sure that your child has a space to work. I've already been talking to my child about that. We have been talking about how his Legos might have to move and how, maybe we need to move the PS4 to a different location so it's not a distraction. But that every child needs a place where they can say, this is where I'm doing my work. There's a lot to say about context when it comes to doing a job. I have found in this online learning environment, you'll notice in the background, I am in the media center at my school because I have found that I cannot be as focused in my kitchen as I can right here. My wife has set up a workstation at our house, again, because context matters. And so I would encourage all parents to set up a workspace for your child as well. It might be a mobile workspace. It might be that they have one of those little pillow desks that they carry on with them. It might be that they're sharing a space with a sibling. It doesn't have to be their own space, but to know that, hey, when it's time for me to log in and do my class, I should go here. The second thing that I would ask you to do is the week before school starts, we will make sure that all of our students and families have copies of their online schedule. I would ask you to go through and walk through that with your child. Help them come up with their own organizational structure for knowing, I need to log into first period at this time. I need to log into third period at this time. Here's where I'm going to go to find my links, even to the point of helping them maybe bookmark some of the primary links they're going to need on their school device, doing that sort of pre-work so that when it comes time for actual instruction, our teachers can focus on engaging your kids in online activities and not on trying to shepherd 20 students through to organizing their schedule for the day. And I think if you do those two sort of pre-prep things, that my teachers are going to work hard to make sure that the instruction they provide is accessible independently. And Ms. Allen has asked a good question. Will there be opportunities to participate in schoolwork outside of the 9:30 to 3 timeframe? I believe there will be. We haven't created the structures for it yet. I've actually had a lot of my teachers sort of pushing me and asking for that, saying, is there any way for us to be a little flexible if we know we've got a small group of, say, 8th graders who are going to do better doing their activities from 4 o'clock to 4:30? Is there a way for us to meet that need? And so we will problem solve and brainstorm. The challenge that I run into is I feel like I've got good teachers who are working really hard to provide the very best online education they can for your children. And I'm a little worried about extending them too far. And so asking them to teach 5 blocked periods back to back over the course of the day, and then to transition directly into additional classes after school, together with, I'm sure a lot of my teachers are going to offer morning time for individual work or for small group work. And I've got 27 teachers who have said that they don't feel like they're in a high-risk category, that they are willing to go out into our communities and provide live support with the guidance and allowance of our school nurse. And so all those things together, I'm worried about asking them of too much. But yes, I think we will be able to provide some opportunities for support after the 3:30 time.
Mr. Penley, Ms. McElhannon had a clarifying question regarding academic classes and connections and what those academic subjects would be.
Yes, so we will run 4 academics and 1 connection each day. The 4 academics are math, ELA, science, and social studies. And then the 2 connections come from our CTAE, fine arts, world languages, and support courses, and physical education.
Thank you. Ms. Knight had a question with, oh, sorry, go ahead. You're probably caught up now.
I'm going to go to Ms. Reynolds, who's asked what curriculum will be used. How will accommodations be made for students with 504s, and how will gifted students be served? It's a lot of questions. So the curriculum that we're using is our standard Clarke County curriculum. If you're not familiar, if you're not aware yet, we are adopting 2 new curricula this year, one for reading and one for mathematics. So our math curriculum is a Carnegie Mathematics curriculum. Our ELA curriculum is a Lucy Calkins writing and a Lucy Calkins reading curriculum. And then our science and social studies are either McDougall Literal or Holt products. But I'll be honest, our science and social studies teachers haven't had an adoption of a new resource in a while. And so quite a few of my social studies and science teachers sort of go outside of our curricular resource and typically supplement with materials that they know and have. As far as accommodations for students with 504s, we're waiting on guidance from our district's 504 coordinator right now. I know that many of you have probably heard about the virtual learning plans that we're writing for our students who are served, who receive special education services. I fully expect that we'll do a similar process with students who are served under 504. And without going into a lot of detail about that process, basically what it means is we'll look at the existing 504 plan and the accommodations that were put in place for in-person instruction. We'll identify which of those accommodations are appropriate for a virtual setting, and we'll transition those. We'll identify the ones that are not appropriate for virtual instruction and decide if they are not appropriate because they're unneeded in a virtual situation or if they need to be adapted. And then finally, we'll look and see, are there additional accommodations or supports that need to be put in place because we are moving into an online environment. And then our gifted service models will remain the same. We are still offering advanced content in both English language arts and mathematics, and we will provide collaborative services in social studies and science. I'm going down to Miss Knight. Sixth graders may find some difficulty in making the transition from elementary to middle school. Are there any extra support opportunities for sixth graders to make sure they're managing well? That's been a source of conversation among my sixth grade team, as well as my leadership team and my administrative team, talking specifically about the idea that we have students in sixth grade rising to us from 4 different feeder schools who all had slightly different technology plans. And so, yes, we are looking at making a little bit of that first week of school more of a transition camp type environment for our rising sixth graders to ensure that they have sort of settled into this new way of learning. And then, as we typically do, we usually do an extended orientation for our rising sixth graders, and then we do a sort of abbreviated orientation for our 7th and 8th graders when we're doing it in person. I would expect that when we get to that week prior to September 8th, that our 6th grade orientation will be a lot more comprehensive than our 7th and 8th grade orientation. As far as check-ins, though, actually, I'm looking at that last part of that sentence of managing well. I think that's something that I have not thought about just in terms of what we need to do to monitor 6th grade differently from how we're monitoring 7th and 8th grade. And so I will, I think Mr. Batson's in our chat right now, and he's one of our 6th grade team leaders, so I may rely on him to help me remember for us to bring that back up with our 6th grade team and how we might put some structures in place for that. Ms. Cornish has asked about 7th graders being allowed to apply for the high school swim team. My understanding right now is that, and Mr. Batson, you can help me out here because I may have forgotten swim as a fall sport, that Clarke Middle is not participating in fall sports. West Side schools are not participating in C-team football. We are not having a volleyball team. We are not going to have a cross-country team this year. And if swim is a high school level sport that's played in the fall, I would say I think we are probably not going to participate in that, but honestly, I would have to go to the high school and get their recommendation, and I'd be happy to follow up on that and include it in my update this weekend.
Yes, Mr. Penley, swimming starts in October, typically.
In October. So that one honestly might be more similar to basketball. So I've talked with our other middle school principals, and we've decided as a group that we are going to assess winter sports and things like basketball, cheerleading, and we can include swim in that at the beginning of October based on what the current situation looks like. And I'll be like, I also feel like, and I'm gonna pause and digress for just a minute, and I hope you'll allow me to editorialize. It is a hard decision-making place that we're in because there are really 2 factions at almost every level of government, of the public, of schools, even in my faculty. And there are some people who feel like we're going to do digital learning for a couple of weeks and we're going to be right back in the building and we're going to try to get back to normal. There's this whole other faction who thinks it's going to be, December, January, February before we're back in school. And so when those 2 people are both trying to make decisions, they have really different end goals in mind. And so sometimes it gets hard to make decisions. But I think in thinking about those sports that aren't starting right now in August and September, we just need to continue to monitor what the landscape is and make good decisions based on what the level of community spread is here in Athens as we get closer to those start dates. Ms. Irwin has asked if or when we are back to face-to-face learning, do we know yet if virtual learning will still be offered? And if so, do we know if it will still be CSD, CMS teachers, or if it'll be switched to another teaching service? I don't have an answer to that question. I was actually feeling really good. I was like 6 for 6 with answers there. But that is one I don't have an answer to. The meeting that I was in this morning, I had to leave before they got to that point in the presentation where they were talking about our return to face-to-face instruction. I expect to get an update from my assistant principal this afternoon, and I'll be able to share that once I'm cleared from the district who's still drafting that plan to share that plan. And so I guess I don't really want to say anymore because I'm really not sure. I'm sorry. That's one that I just don't have an answer to. Ms. Cornish has asked if we're going to be conducting Clarke Scholars this year. I actually had not given that thought yet, and I'm looking at my teacher faces to see if I've got a Clarke Scholars representative here, and I don't see one. I will check in with Ms. Baker, Mr. Woodward, and Mr. Smith this afternoon. New page. And see if I can find the answer to that. I don't see why we would not. And when I think about what Clarke Scholars does, it actually feels even more appropriate in this context to be encouraging kids to develop their own unique gifts and talents and serve their community in various ways. So I don't see why they would not do that. And so I'll check in and get an answer by the time I send my letter this weekend.
Did you get the two? Sorry, go ahead.
Ms. Cornish has asked if there will, or I think that's Dr. Cornish too, isn't it? I'm so sorry. Will there be tutoring available for math or other subjects like it was during the school year? We do still have some connections to tutors through UGA. For our accelerated math students, we will still be offering math counts, which is technically a competition, but it's also a really good opportunity for our students to have some one-on-one tutoring with UGA math majors. And they will continue to do that tutoring virtually. And then we are still partnering with some other community organizations to provide tutoring services the way that we would in general. That is still part of that developing our structures, part of our planning right now that we're working out in terms of how do we maintain connections with students to their mentors if they're not able to do that outside of the school, and then how do we continue to provide some of that tutoring service. And that also then goes back to that conversation about how much I feel like I can ask my teachers to continue doing into the late afternoon and evening hours as far as supporting individual students.
Miss Allen had a question about whether live sessions will be recorded so they can be watched later.
That's a hard piece for me right now. My thought is that when students are absent, we will record those lessons. When you start thinking about just the storage capacity, so the Zoom that we're on right now, let's assume that we go the hour that we're supposed to go, I'm recording it. It's going to be a pretty big file, and the Zoom company charges to store it for me, and my computer will hold about 10 of these before I can no longer hold them anymore. And so I don't have a solution to that yet. I don't have enough money to purchase the storage that I would need to record every single session in the building. But then when you think about 12, 24, 36 core content teachers plus 12 more special education teachers. We're talking about 50 different teachers almost recording 5 lessons a day. They're all an hour long. That's more infrastructure than we have. So yes, we would like to be able to record when we have students absent. I know a lot of my teachers record snippets of their presentation. So they might record the part where they are modeling a problem, for example, or where they're delivering direct instruction. And then when they maybe move into student-centered work or question and answer or conversation or something like that, they might stop the video, and that will prevent some of that. So we would like to be able to do that, but we do still have to come up with some solutions to some problems that present themselves when we try to think about recording that many lessons.
There was a question also about homework that will be done or expected outside the 9 to 3:30 time. That was from Miss Allen.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things that we've sort of moved along, and that's not something we've come back to rethink about through the lens of distance learning. My gut answer is to say yes, because I feel like my teachers have typically done a pretty good job not making homework sort of an overwhelming, punitive, I hate to do it things. Most of my teachers are pretty clear and concise. The research around homework says that it doesn't really have a significant impact at the elementary level, that at the high school level, it only has a significant impact when it's practicing skills that students have already been taught and are at a high level of mastery of. And there's not actually a lot of good lit that supports homework at the middle school level. And so what we try to do is treat homework as an opportunity to practice a habit. We do know that when students get to high school, they're going to have to do work outside of their classes in order to be successful, particularly in upper level, high level AP type classes. And so we really just try to give kids homework through the lens of we want them to practice setting aside 10 minutes for math, 10 minutes for science, 10 minutes for social studies, 10 minutes for ELA every night. I guess that's one thing that I'll take back to my leadership team. And that's something that would be good to get feedback on as we go through those first 2 weeks of class. If our teachers are assigning, 20 minutes of independent reading as homework for ELA, is that overwhelming after a student has spent, the day looking at their computer? We can hear that feedback, and we're more than happy to adjust to it if we find that what we're assigning is overwhelming.
We had a request, Mr. Penley, from Ms. Lewis, that when we're repeating what somebody has asked, not just to answer the question, but to read the question, due to some people not being able to actually see the chat box.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I've been trying to do that. Sometimes I forget. So, and I'm trying to scroll down.
Mimi Elliott Gower had a question. Mr. Batson was addressing the sports questions. So if people are able to see the chat box, he's addressed those. If not, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer those about, I think wrestling was one of them. But Mimi Elliott Gower had a question too.
And thank you, Dr. Dykman, for joining us. I'm sorry I missed that you were here. So please feel free to weigh in if there are answers that I'm missing from my update this morning that you might have a little more information about.
All I wanted to say, I was just answering Rachel's question about whether if we go back to in-person classes, whether there will still be a digital option. And we did get an update on that at the board meeting last night. And there was there's some slides that I believe are available also, but if you watch the video, and I'm sure this is information you were going to get today also, about a phased plan. And in all the phases, there will still be an option for digital if parents and students choose that.
Thank you. That's exciting news.
Who will teach it or how that digital option will work.
Thank you for that. That was very helpful and super exciting. Ms. Hinger, you wanted to weigh in just with a quick word about after school services? That would be great. And then I can see if I can catch up with where my next question is in the chat.
Hi guys. After school services are going to be part of our digital learning too. And so starting, I believe, September the 19th, it's mid-September. I think it's a couple of weeks after we start school. We're going to start doing the 21st Century After School program digitally. Now, our numbers are very limited on that. We only have about 25 to 30 slots available for that. But anyway, because of the number of teachers that the grant is written for us to have. But if you have a student that may need some extra help during, the afternoons, or you just see that they're struggling, you can reach out to me for the application. And in the meantime, I'll try to get we're meeting today to kind of get more information, but I just wanted to put that in your mind. Right now, the hours they're proposing are from 4:30 until 6 p.m. And so that would include one period of homework help kind of things, or classwork help, any kind of schoolwork help with a teacher in a classroom with probably 10 or less students digitally. And then the second portion would be some sort of enrichment activity. So maybe a cooking activity or something fun like that. So I'll know more later. Just wanted to put that out there in case kids are needing extra help in the after normal hours.
All right, thank you for that. And Ms. Tubman has gotten us an update on our Clarke Scholars question. Our team that runs our Clarke Scholars program has every intent to continue running that, whether we're virtual, hybrid, in person, what have you. So you can fully expect for Clarke Scholars to be available this year. Ms. Cornish, or Dr. Cornish, has asked, how accessible will the homeroom and other teachers be for parents to receive updates on their children's progress in the digital setting? As parents, we may not recognize quickly enough that their child is struggling in a specific class overall. That's a really good question. And I'm going to sort of answer it in a roundabout way, so forgive me if I go on a little bird walk. I have always felt like if you hire really good teachers, you should be able to sort of sit back and let them go, provide them feedback, and let them do their thing, and try not to micromanage the work that they do. I've been very upfront with my faculty about the fact that our community needs a high level of consistency in order for online learning to work. And so we are going to have some structures that are going to be common across the entire building, really more so than we've had in the past. Some of those structures will be about communication with parents. Teachers have protected time each day where they are not required to be in class. And so you should expect to have responses from emails and other communication like that within 24 hours. And then our grading and assessment practices will also be very consistent across the building, with a fixed number of grades that you should expect to go into our Infinite Campus system each week, so that you can monitor how your child is doing. That being said, if you ever, I don't, and my teachers feel free to weigh in that are in the chat with us. Yeah, I know that most of my teachers, if you're ever concerned and just want an update about your child and how they're doing with online learning, all of them are perfectly willing to do a phone call, to answer an email, or to give you an update in any way that's going to help you make sure that your child is being successful. We are trying to do a much higher level of sort of communication and parent outreach as we move into this. And so you should expect some phone calls over the next couple of weeks, again, to follow up on the survey results, to check in on your internet access, your child's computer, whether they need to get a new one. And then I would expect some of that outreach to continue as we move into the actual online learning. And so if we notice that a child isn't really engaging, if we notice that a child hasn't turned something in, you should expect to get a pretty quick phone call from the school. It might be from one of their teachers, but it might be from someone on our community outreach team. You know, I've watched some of the other town halls and the board meetings. I know there's got to be more questions than this.
I think everybody's processing.
And it is, and like, just know we're doing the same thing. And we get new information almost every day. And when we get that new information, we filter it through the lens of the plans that we've already made. We assess what plans need to change based on that new information. And then we decide how they need to change. And that's sort of the state that we are in and that we're going to be in for just a little while longer. And I guess I'll also just say, if you have questions about, like, we are still doing the same work that we would do each year in terms of thinking about our school growth plan and how we want to improve outcomes for students at Clarke Middle, and thinking about how we want to change the culture at Clarke Middle. All of that work is still going on, while we are also trying to make this transition into virtual learning. Mr. Morales has asked a very good question. Does Friday look different from an academic stance? The middle school principals, in consultation with some of our district instructional leaders at our last meeting, did discuss the idea of making Friday a personalization, differentiation, individualization day. And so it would be primarily asynchronous instruction, with the exception of students who need additional support in small groups or one-on-one settings. It would also be an opportunity for students to work on enrichment tasks, acceleration tasks, students who are in our accelerated math class to get some additional math help, and things like that. That has not yet been approved as far as I'm aware, and so I'm hesitant to commit to it at this point, but that is the plan that we are looking at. I expect to have an answer definitely by the beginning of next week of whether that is what we're going to do. Let's see, Miss Knight has asked, will there be a time slot built into the 9 to 3:30 class schedule that encourages students to get up and do something physical, perhaps even go outside? Yes, we've built in an extended lunch period, and that's why we have broken our Clarke Middle schedule into both a synchronous and an asynchronous block during each of those 60-minute periods. So really, during almost every class period, there will be an opportunity that if kids need to run around and burn off a little energy before they come back and look at a screen again, that there'll be an opportunity to do that. There'll also be opportunities for kids to take a break and text with their friends, or to take a break and go grab a snack, or to take a break and do any of the other things that we might expect them to do when they're not engaged in academic work. And so I guess I'll go back to that question and say, I do want to highlight, our intent is not to have kids in front of their computers like we are for 8 hours a day or 7 hours a day or however long it is. For those of you that are maybe not in education but have to attend a lot of Zoom meetings virtually, and it's a lot of staring at faces like mine and listening to people talk, that's not what we are trying to plan for instruction to look like. We've worked really diligently over the last 2 weeks to think about what are the engagement and collaboration needs of middle school students, and what tools are there out there to make online learning more engaging. And so we have really had a lot of conversation as a faculty about really sticking to tight 5 to 10 minute times where we're actually doing direct lecture or notes, but utilizing multiple other online strategies to engage students during the rest of their synchronous time, and then making sure that their asynchronous work is both meaningful and accessible to them when they're not necessarily sitting in front of a teacher. Ms. Elliott Gower has asked if PTA has plans for the year. I've been hesitant to cancel the OWL flight just because once we cancel it, we lose the services of the race team that does all of the timing and everything. We will have to continue to monitor based on the infection rates in Clarke County right now. And I'm not a health professional, and so please don't assume that I'm speaking with any level of expertise. I don't predict us being able to hold the OWL flight in October. But it is still currently scheduled. And if we find ourselves in a position where we need to cancel it, we will look at other ways of raising funds for our PTA. I really love Ms. Elliott Gower's idea that we could actually see if people might be willing to pay for the opportunity not to run. I know that I would be in that category too. I would pay quite a bit not to have to run. And then I believe and do I have a PTA executive staff member?
Mr. Penley, I'm here, Kim.
Hey.
I just said hi, I don't have a visual because it's, but we are looking for parents who want to serve on exec. So the 4 of us who served last year and 3 of the 4 of us who served the year before are holding steady. But if you're interested in stepping into this really creative way of helping serve our parents and teachers, let me know. Sandy is going to take over as president, and the rest of us will hold steady until we've got some new helpers. So send me an email. This is Kim Ness. If you want to step into a leadership role this year. That's all. But we will be there somehow.
And they have provided so much support over the last year that I mean, it really is a team that I lean on pretty heavily. And so I really encourage anyone who's interested to step up and be part of that team. I believe we have a PTA meeting on the calendar for next Tuesday evening. I need to talk with Ms. Cedarbaum about whether we want to continue to have that meeting or whether we want to push it back until we have a little bit more information that we'd be able to share with parents about our online learning plan.
Mr. Penley, Ms. Loudermilk had a question regarding will students be able to have opportunities to get to know each other, specifically 6th graders?
Yes, absolutely. And Mr. Batson or any other 6th grade teachers who are on, y'all are welcome to weigh in. As silly as it seems, a big part of some of the training that we've done over the last 2 weeks has been, how do we connect together? We had a lot of new faculty members join us, which was a great thing. I'm super impressed with the new teachers that we have this year, and we had to figure out how to get to know each other, even though we haven't been able to be together in the building. And so we have learned about a lot of games that you can play with Zoom. We've learned about a lot of connecting strategies that one can use with Zoom. And so in the same way that the first week of 6th grade is really a lot of games, a lot of procedures, and a lot of getting to know you and just a little bit of content, the first week of online learning for 6th grade will probably be very similar.
Ms. Lewis stated that there had been a survey about school lunch preferences. If lunch assistance isn't needed, does not participating penalize those who do, or does it, as I assume, reserve food and funding for the most in need? Forgive me, I feel like that might be, so I know we've surveyed our community to death over the last 6 months, and that may be one that sort of has slipped past my radar. I am not familiar with the lunch survey. I would assume, and I believe Mr. Lawrence Harris has been heading up our food service sort of initiative as we've been closed. Any survey that went out, I'm sure, was built to give him information about whether he was meeting the needs of our community. He is very intentional about making sure that every community that has a need has that need being filled. And so I'm sure that survey was just to make sure that the current bus routes that we were using, the 2 current distribution sites that we were using, I'm sure that survey was built to make sure that our current plan was sufficient and that he didn't need to change it. That's a guess, though. I'll see if I can follow up and find additional information about the nutrition survey. And if there's anybody on our call, I didn't realize we had 60 people. This is my biggest principal's coffee ever. If there's anybody on who has an answer to that question, you're welcome to feel free to weigh in. Miss Dunn would be breaking out those coffee pots right now if everybody was at school.
Right. I don't think we would have enough coffee cups. So I'm sort of glad we're at a distance right now.
Mr. Miller had sorry. Go on.
I'm scrolling to try to get to the next place.
I think it was Mr. Miller.
All right. Will students be required to have their cameras on during synchronous learning? That is a really good conversation. And we have been having it sort of over and over again, and we haven't settled on a norm. I mean, I think most people who've had kids at Clarke Middle for the last year know me well enough to know I don't think we would ever force a child to turn on their camera if they were in a situation where turning on their camera would serve as a source of embarrassment for them or would make them feel any kind of way about logging in or would dissuade them from logging in any way. That being said, I'll tell you, having done a lot of Zooms over the last 2 months, I really like to be able to see faces. And so like right now I see a lot of words and a lot of people's names, but I don't see a lot of faces, and it's a lot harder for me to connect with you as an audience. And we can overcome that, absolutely. But we will be encouraging students to have their camera on, partly for the connection that it creates for students. To go back to that idea that our rising 6th graders are coming from 4 different buildings and they don't really know each other yet, it's going to be even harder for them to get to know each other if they can't put faces with some of those names. So yes, we are going to try to create the norm that when possible, students have their cameras on, but ultimately, we're not going to penalize students who feel like they need to have them off for some reason.
Mr. Finley?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Rebecca Glennie is with us. She could probably answer questions about FFA and explain some of the ways that we are adjusting our student activities during this time.
Yeah, Ms. Glennie, would you like to talk at all about our plans for FFA or other sort of club type activities?
Yeah, so the FFA will continue to run. All of our competitions that we normally do have been moved to a digital format. We have changed our schedule, so the ones that usually require an in-person presence, like live animals, have been moved to the spring instead of the fall. I will still be doing meetings every day after school. I'm required in my contract to be there an extra hour every day. I have created a digital, like Google Classroom specifically for FFA students. And my goal is to keep some of the structure from previous years so that way students have consistency, where we have meetings that are kind of more geared at students who are in class and meetings who are more geared for kids who are really into the FFA, to offer some kind of differentiation. But more or less, I'm going to be responding to what students' needs are when I'm kind of crafting these after-school opportunities for students.
And if I can just give a quick plug for FFA, Miss Glennie's spring sessions were some of our best attended and most engaged sessions. She was doing online learning before it was cool, so to speak. And so as some other after school opportunities may go away for students, like some of our sporting opportunities, athletic opportunities, other after school clubs and events, knowing that FFA is going to be something that students can participate in digitally through the fall, I would highly encourage your child. It's a great opportunity for them to engage in work that really does sort of blend over academic work and enrichment type work. So there's my plug for that. I'll also say, I believe we had a comment from Mr. DeMaria about making the Owl Flight virtual. I would love to do that. I hadn't even thought about that as an idea, and it sounds like you're volunteering to be on the PTA and maybe help us do that. And then the next question was about parent-teacher conferences. Yes, we will be holding parent-teacher conferences. They will be very different from the way that they've been in the past. I'm actually the middle school representative from principals on I can't remember what they call it anymore. I think it's a cross-functional team at the district who is developing our plan for parent-teacher conferences. We have not met at all yet. That's one of the decisions that we decided. Parent-teacher conferences happen in October. So as we're thinking about the trajectory of decisions that we have to make and what the priority is, that's something that we'll probably start thinking about in a couple of weeks. But yes, the intent is still to offer some form of parent-teacher conference. The CMS campus is no longer, so the question was, will the CMS campus continue to be a COVID test facility? We are no longer a test site. They moved out 2 weeks ago when administrative staff returned to the building. Currently, the Hillsman Health Center is doing testing for the Clarke County community for students and faculty who are asymptomatic. So it's sort of a well center. They do not want people showing up there if they're sick, only people who are doing proactive testing. And then there are a number of other testing facilities in Athens. Oh, and I say that question was already answered, sorry. And yes, and as far as the, to go back to that, the conversation about cameras on versus cameras off, I completely glossed over and didn't even address the fact that sometimes the camera on versus off is a matter of internet connectivity, and that we know that some students, in order to be able to engage, are going to need to have their cameras muted because like I know there was a point in the summer where I was working online in a Zoom, my wife was on a Zoom, my daughter was on a Zoom, my other daughter was on a Zoom, and my son was trying to play Fortnite. I don't know why he wasn't on his Zoom. He probably should have been. And so that put an additional strain on our internet, and so we all couldn't have our video going simultaneously. And so we will absolutely make accommodations for those sorts of things. Ms. Adams has asked, will all of the teachers of the same subject be using the same content and moving at the same pace? She's curious if friends wanted to work together, if that's something they could do with different teachers. Yes, I feel pretty confident saying that those lessons will be similar enough and the content pacing will be similar enough. That goes back to that idea that we are working towards a much higher level of consistency. I think this is, and again, I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish and paint too rosy a picture of things because it really, like, we are in a crisis. But one of the things, the positives that I think will come out of this is the level of consistency and how that consistency can impact our instructional practices. And so I would expect that friends who maybe are both in 6th grade social studies, but maybe one of them has Mr. Batson and one of them has Ms. Dabrowski, that they would be able to work together. Occasionally that pacing might be off by a day or maybe a handful of days, but ultimately I think they would be able to work together. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, in reference to the idea of pods, like I said earlier, we are exploring the idea. I do have 27 teachers who have voluntarily said they feel comfortable going out into our communities. I'm currently sort of reaching out to some different community groups to see if there are community centers, if there are green spaces, if there are other places that we could use in a safe way to send some of our teachers out into our communities to support student learning. I don't know that it's going to be at the level that people are talking about when they talk about learning pods. Those are a much more structured type of time. I'm thinking more we would be able to send 2 teachers to say one of our community centers down the road for 2 hours on Tuesday and Thursday to provide additional support. Those 2 teachers on Monday and Wednesday might go to a different community and provide those 2 hours of support for students who are interested. I'm still in the preliminary planning phases of that, and I'm trying to weigh the needs of our students to have some additional maybe in-person support with the need to keep my faculty safe. And I'm going to be relying on my school nurse to help me develop protocols for doing that if we decide to move forward with it. Mr. Miller has asked if students have the ability to use digital backgrounds as part of their student profiles. I think from a technical standpoint, yes, they do. The Zoom applet that students will use on their devices does include the ability to use a virtual background. It is a setting that the host of a meeting can enable or disable. We as a faculty, that's one of the things on our list for next week is to start creating Zoom norms so that all of our teachers are using the same online video conference tool and also the same online video conference settings. And we haven't started that conversation yet. And I guess I don't really have a preference other than I don't want it to turn into a management issue for my teachers where students are maybe projecting images that are distracting to other students who are trying to learn or that might be inappropriate for students at some levels. And so my initial thought would be, no, if a kid needs the virtual background, they're welcome just to turn their camera off. But I'll bring that to my leadership team to discuss. Ultimately, and just so people accuse me of being transparent to a fault, and sometimes I am, just to sort of describe what our decision-making process has been at the building. I feel like because we're in such a different time for teachers, I've been trying to include them as heavily as I can in our decision making. And so whenever things like that come up, whatever norm we're trying to create, whatever structure we're trying to put in place, it usually starts as an idea with my admin team. It then goes to our leadership team who vets it, who puts a little more detail to it. They then take it out to their grade level teams or our connections team for feedback. We bring it back together to the admin team to finally put it into practice. And we try to follow that step by step religiously so that everybody feels like they have been involved in the decision-making process. Yeah, Dr. Dykeman, would you like to weigh in on what Lawrence Harris is doing? I'm just seeing that comment.
Sure, yeah. He talked about it at the board meeting last night. So if you want more information, I would suggest watching that portion in case I misspeak. But Lawrence Harris, who is in charge of community engagement and strategic partnerships, had a meeting 2 days ago, I think, and I think he said with about 60 community organizations asking about whether they're able to provide safe space for students to come during the day and maybe definitely have some adults to facilitate learning and also have online access and places where students can go if they don't have space in their houses that are conducive to learning, or maybe just need help and don't have parents there who can help them at the time. And so he said he sent them a survey to fill out, like how many students could you accommodate? What kind of accommodations do you have? And just a bunch of questions. And he said he's already received 7 back from organizations who are wanting to help out. And he's hoping to get more. And like I said, that meeting just happened the other day. So he's hoping to get a bunch more back and then sort of figure out how to make this work with community organizations. So, he would be the person to contact, and hopefully I asked also when would families learn about these services or opportunities, and he's hoping to get that information out just as soon as he gets the information from the organization. So it is something that's in the works, and hopefully there will be lots of community organizations. If you have a community organization or a part of one that would be interested in doing something like this, Lawrence Harris would be the person that you want to contact about it.
Thank you for that. And again, those of you who've been around for any length of time know that I talk a lot about community and the power of community to really transform education, not just in general, but specifically for Clarke County. And this is the opportunity for that. And so if you are a member of a community organization that's looking for an opportunity to serve, if you are someone who has resources that we might be able to use or deploy in terms of serving our students in our community during the pandemic, please, you can reach out to Lawrence Harris, you can reach out to your assigned board member, you can reach out to me if you want it to be Clarke Middle specifically, because at this point, I feel like the more support we can get and the more that we work together as a community to problem solve the issues that we have, the better our solutions are going to be. Like I said before, there's no way to craft a solution right now that makes everybody happy. But the more minds we have on it, the more resources we have on it, I think the closer we can get to it. A couple of questions that have come through the chat. One was about rising 6th graders and whether they're keeping the computers that they had from 5th grade or whether they're trading them out. Currently the plan, as I understand it, is for all students to keep the device that they have. Like I referenced earlier, if your child has a device that is not functional, that doesn't charge, that doesn't hold a charge, that has multiple missing keys, that has other problems with it that make it so it would not be conducive to working on academic work, then we will provide opportunities those 2 weeks leading up to school starting for you to come and trade out your device for a new one, or if not a brand new one, at least a new to your child one that would be in better working condition. The other question was about our social emotional learning. It is at the end of the day. Are there concerns about students blowing it off and not showing up? Yes, absolutely. There were concerns about that when we were in-person class because students started to learn that we did advisement every Monday morning, and we noticed that our tardies to school got a little bit higher on Monday mornings. In the same way that, and this is sort of a shift in mindset that I've talked about with my teachers that's hard for us. In face-to-face learning, the bus drops them off and they have to be here. Like we have like a captive audience. In digital learning, And just like right now, like if y'all are done looking at my bald head and listening to me talk, like you can just click end and you can go, and there's not really anything that we can do about that. And the same is true for kids. And so our mentality, our approach to that has been, well, we have to craft instruction, we have to craft activities, we have to craft engagement, we have to craft opportunities for collaboration in a way that kids want to participate. And we'll take the same approach to our social emotional learning at the end of the day. If I'm completely honest with myself, yes, we're going to have some kids who don't log in for that. And that'll come back to our community connection and deciding how we want to follow up with those kids and what the reason for those kids not logging in is.
Hey, Mr. Finley, can I clarify on the device switching? Because the information in your chat and what you said are different. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood.
Uh-oh. Yes, please clarify if I've given incorrect information.
You were right. Some of the information in the chat is what we'd initially planned on, but that's not the case. We're trying to keep it as simple as possible. So if your child has a working device, it doesn't matter what school it came from, they need to keep that working device. The only reason that you would want to bring a device back here to us, even if your kid has a device that they picked up at Barrow Elementary or Timothy or wherever, and if you have a kid that's going to high school, those kids can keep the device they have. If your device works, please keep it. If you need to return a device because it has something wrong with it, we're going to have a 2-week period where you can actually exchange them for one that is working. If you're just like, this one doesn't work at all, or if you know someone who's leaving Clarke County School District, the next 3 Fridays will be a drop-off only from 9 to 11. And I'm sitting out front right now waiting. So, but if they need to exchange, then Mr. Penley will send out more information about that. That's going to be in the 2 weeks leading up to instruction. Thank you.
I've had some additional questions about orientation and whether there will be an orientation. Yes, there absolutely will be an open house orientation type activity. I believe it'll be 2-pronged. There'll be a drive-through event for children and families to come and pick up things that they need for online learning. And then there will also be a virtual event where you'll have an opportunity to meet your teacher. I've looked at a couple of models from some other districts in the Atlanta area and some schools outside of the state that have done orientation activities for virtual learning, and in terms of them being synchronous versus asynchronous. And I just haven't made a decision yet about which I think is going to be best for our school community. I would like to just, and I don't know if y'all are able to do this, but if anybody can access the participant window and you notice there's a yes green button and a no red button, if I could just do a quick informal poll to get some feedback. I've been thinking about whether we need to do a separate orientation for students and then a separate orientation for parents, so that parents have sort of an orientation experience that's geared toward what is your role in supporting this, whereas students have an orientation experience that is more geared towards here's what you need to make sure you're doing every day. Would you just sort of give me a yes if you feel like you would like to have a separate experience from your child, or a no if you're okay just experiencing an orientation that we would do for your child? All right. So I will take that back to my leadership team as well. And it might be that we do grade level orientations for students, and then we might do one massive orientation for all of the adults or some other format of that. But I will take that back to my leadership team with the possibility of doing a 2-pronged orientation. Thank you for that quick feedback. I appreciate it. Oh, I got to the end of the questions. Wow. I'll pause for just a minute. I know that I've given you a lot of information. I know that there's still a lot of information that we just don't have yet. And so I'll give just a minute of wait time to see if there are other questions or anything else that I can clarify while I'm sort of waiting for those things to come in. Again, I have a habit of sort of painting everything with a rosy picture, because I think we have to think about the opportunities that we have. I do think there is opportunity in this year. I know that we're sort of saying, there's the memes on the internet about 2020 and how, we're just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. We have an opportunity to really qualitatively change the way that we educate kids. We have an opportunity to really focus with a clear lens on who the students who are most vulnerable in our community are and what we really need to do to address their needs. And I think this is highlighting those needs. And I think if we think about it intentionally, if we make sure that we are thoughtful in our decision making, if we're making sure that we are clear in our communication with our community, I think ultimately we can come out the other side of it, having survived what is ultimately an unpleasant experience, but hopefully with some better understanding of what we need to do to change education overall. To that end, Clarke Middle's already partnered with some of our UGA friends to study our response to COVID-19, specifically with a lens towards the students who did not want to engage with us in the spring, and what our strategies are for engaging them in the fall. And so we have 2 professors in the College of Education and a sort of a cohort of graduate students who are observing, who are doing interviews with teachers, who I think as we move into learning, we'll be asking for permission from parents to do some interviews with students to sort of give us some information and help us inform the decisions that we make going forward as well. Because ultimately, and I've said this since the spring, if we can't come out of this changed, if we come out of this and go right back to the way that we always did things, then clearly we've ignored an opportunity that we have to change for the better. I'll get out of my pulpit now, I'm sorry. I'm scrolling up for just a minute in case I missed something. Dr. Mojak has asked if there's a plan to continue the talks on race, community equity as a campus. Yes. And I actually have a parent letter that I haven't sent yet because I'm just not ready to send it. But yes, we are going to have a continued focus on the issues of equity, both in our community and in the larger world. We're going to be exploring the Black Lives Matter movement with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders through our core curriculum this year. Our 8th grade team has asked me to purchase the book Stamped for every 8th grader in the building, and they're going to do it as a grade level activity. As a school, we have a small cohort of teachers who have joined the Abolitionist Teaching Network and are participating in their webinars and running a professional learning community sort of independently amongst themselves. And so, yes, we are very aware of those issues. And that sort of goes back to that idea that we have to use this as an opportunity to identify what needs to change. And if we don't keep a laser-like focus, and I'm sorry to go back to a word that our former superintendent used to use, if we don't keep that laser-like focus on the students who are the most vulnerable in our community, then we're missing the boat, and we're missing what our objective is here. All right, I'm going to pause for just a minute. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a question. If anybody has a comment, or if you'd like to share a strategy that you've used, I do think that as we sort of move through, our PTA may be a good opportunity, not necessarily to come and get all of this sort of information about procedures and what's changing and what's the same, but to really give you an outlet to talk to others. I know my child has some quarantine friends that we allow him to see because we know that the families that they are with are using the same preventative measures that we are. But he also has experienced some isolation this summer that's caused some mental health issues that we've had to address. And I know that we may need a forum for parents to discuss how they are handling their children at home, what their plans are when they have to be on Zooms while their kids are on Zooms. And I would love for our PTA, or just to create a space for our parents to come together for that sort of thing as well. Ms. Ness has asked if I'm going to post this coffee somewhere. It'll take about 2 hours for the video to render after I stop the meeting. And once I get it from the Zoom folks, I will post it to our Facebook page. If our PTA wouldn't mind posting it to their Facebook page as well. I know that's how a lot of people got the information about this. And then I'll also include a link in my parent letter this Sunday.
Mr. Penley, I hope I didn't mistype earlier, but my understanding is that when meetings are recorded, the chat is also recorded. Is that correct? Because that's what I stated.
Yes, and that's a good thing if you're Zooming with a lot of other situations right now. It's a good thing for you to know too, that when the chat function or when the video is downloaded, the chats are downloaded, the private chats are also downloaded. So whoever the host of the meeting is can read all of the private chats. And that has been a source of embarrassment for a number of people in the past couple of weeks. So be careful about what you put in the chat.
Okay, that was new to me. Thank you.
Ms. York has asked what the PTA Facebook page is. And I don't think I can share my screen right now because I've got confidential information on the other screen. If you just search on Facebook for Clarke Middle School PTA, I believe there are 3 that are out there, but if you pick the one that has the nice owl logo, that's going to be us. And the most recent post I think that they've had has been about this principal's coffee, so that's another way to verify you've got the right Clarke Middle PTA. And if you don't already follow Clarke Middle School, our page, please follow that as well. We just had the good fortune to be able to celebrate 3 FFE Foundation for Excellence Award winners that we had on our faculty this year. It's also how I disseminate information when I need information to go out quickly. And while I'm sending my parent letter via email every Sunday, I also post it to our Facebook page for people who may have missed it. All right, I'm going to exercise my wait time for just another couple of minutes to make sure there's no burning questions that are still out there. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope that you had some of your questions answered. I hope that you're leaving with at least a little bit of a higher level of confidence in what we're doing as a school to prepare for online learning and to prepare for the eventual face-to-face returning of students to in-person instruction. I will hang out for another maybe 5 minutes or so. So if you had a question or a comment that you wanted to make, but you didn't necessarily want to make it in front of the entire group, please feel free to stick around and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. So thanks everybody for showing up. And please tell your friends to check the Facebook page to get more information if they weren't able to be here today. Thank you, Dr. Dykman, for joining us and providing those additional answers. I appreciate that clarity.
Thank you. Bye.
Mr. Penley, as always, I'm so impressed by your ability to do these chats and coffee meetings and such. So kudos to you. You're like phenomenal.
You know, I found if you commit to being honest, then these things are really pretty easy because you don't ever have to worry about what you've said before. And so
Right.
my guiding principle is just be honest.
I like it.
I'll see you guys next week.
All right, bye guys. Becky, is that you, Miss Glennie? No, that must be somebody else. All right, well, if there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and log off. All right, bye-bye.